This week in gaming, Visceral Games was shut down, the 4.0 Nintendo Switch update brings video capture to the console, the Chimera Empire is coming to Civilization 6, Destiny 2 has launched on PC, happy TwitchCon to everybody attending, Warner Bros. Interactive Entertainment is cancelling the LEGO Dimensions series, Monument Valley 2 is coming to Android and iOS on November 6, Age of Empires Definitive Edition has been delayed to early 2018, and we're back on the air. Sorry that we vanished for a little while, folks. We've been hard at work behind the scenes bringing One RBC Gaming Weekly to more platforms. As you may rightly assume, working through technical hiccups has been a bit of a challenge, but it's one that we have met. First off, this week Electronic Arts shut down developer Visceral Games. Visceral, in case you're unfamiliar with their work, was the studio responsible for the Dead Space series as well as Battlefield Hardline, a few Sim spin-off and such. Their current project was an untitled single-player Star Wars game being directed by Amy Hennig. Amy Hennig started in the industry with Michael Jordan, Chaos in the Windy City, and had since moved on to working on bigger games, such as Uncharted 3 and the Legacy of Kain series. As you may rightly assume, players were disappointed to hear that Hennig was off the project, and indeed, players were quite disappointed to learn that Visceral was dead. Also, people were frustrated that EA had just shot another studio in the back of the head. Rest in peace, Maxis. Anyway, in a blog post by EA's Executive Vice President Patrick Soderlund, this new Star Wars game was shaping up to be a story-based linear adventure game, and apparently that's not what their playtesters wanted. Soderlund's blog post also says that they've been closely tracking fundamental shifts in the marketplace, which basically means that Electronic Arts thinks that the game wouldn't be profitable, but they will be using the bones of this game to build something new. I'll bet you a bantha that it's going to be some sort of loot box infested, pay-to-win, season pacified, always online, $60 DLC fest that won't work on launch day thanks to errant DRM. Either that or a card game. Speaking seriously, however, the way that the game industry's been moving, it seems that it's not enough for a single-player game to merely launch as a linear, one-off experience. There need to be about a half-dozen ways to funnel money into the game at all times. As of late, it seems that loot boxes are the most profitable means of making money with a video game. In case you've just come out of 20 years of solitary confinement, what you should know is that multiplayer-focused video games often offer in-game items to players through what are called loot boxes. Imagine if, in order to play Mario, you had to purchase items with actual money in order to make it through certain levels. Except you wouldn't actually buy these items outright. Instead, you had to buy a loot box, or 5, or 50 for $20, best value, and then pray that one of them contained the item that you need. Now, most of the time, these loot boxes have just been used for cosmetic items. I'm still trying to get that fancy Zenyatta skin. However, as of late, loot boxes have come under fire as the latest way that the industry is trying to milk every penny out of games. It's business at the expense of art, and it seems to have come to a head over the release of Middle-earth: Shadow of War, sequel to the critically acclaimed Lord of the Rings fanfic Shadow of Mordor. The game received a loot box system in which new enemies and items could be purchased for the game. This didn't sit well with either players or the press, with Polygon referring to the system as predatory. While the loot boxes weren't necessary to complete the game, their inclusion was widely criticized. The reason why everybody hates loot boxes so suddenly is because they're viewed as a form of gambling. Think about it. If you don't have an item in a game that you want, or perhaps in the future need, assuming that the game allows you to buy items outright, you're probably going to have to buy these things marked up $5 to $10. For the same price, you could buy 5 to 10 loot boxes and get a little dopamine rush each time you go to open them up. If you're a person who's had problems with actual gambling in the past, this new model of video games could prove troublesome. Lately, the pushback against loot boxes has reached the ears of governments. Over in the United Kingdom, there's a petition to have video game loot boxes regulated by actual gambling laws in the same way that they're regulated in China, where, by law, game publishers must divulge the odds of your winning something worthwhile from a loot box. This UK petition has passed the necessary 10,000 signatures required in order to have the government respond. At the time of this video's production, there's not yet been a response. Thus far, it seems that video games have largely avoided running afoul of gambling commissions due to the fact that in-game items don't actually have value outside of the game. Unless you violate the terms of service and sell your account, those cosmetics aren't worth anything. Personally, I'm disappointed by the news of this Star Wars game being cancelled, in large part because it means that a bunch of game developers are suddenly unemployed. But it also points to a dangerous trend, the games as service model. What happens when formerly single-player video games are only playable when connected to a server, and everything is a quasi-MMO? This isn't the future of games that I want. What do you think? Does the death of Visceral's Star Wars game point to a worrisome trend within the industry? Is it a worrisome trend at all? Hit us up on Twitter at OneRuleBeCool with your thoughts. We'd be happy to share them on our next episode of 1RBC Gaming Weekly.
And I'm helping to realize her world.
This week, the Poland-based 11-bit studios unveiled that their upcoming ARPG, Moonlighter, is coming to the Nintendo Switch. Previously announced for Xbox One, PS4, and PC, the game tells the tale of Will, an aging shopkeeper in a fantasy world who dreams of being an adventurer. And by moonlight, at the end of a long day's work, he ventures into dungeons to fight monsters and find new loot to sell in a shop. The game was a pretty big success on Kickstarter, and is set to be released in 2018. Do you have child-sized hands? Great news! This week Sony unveiled the mini wired Gamepad. Now this is a small version of a PlayStation controller designed for kids and people with tiny hands. If your children struggle with the full-sized PlayStation controller, they shouldn't be playing video games. Nope, just kidding. You may want to consider purchasing this. Bear in mind, however, that it doesn't feature the touchpads or haptic feedback motors of the proper PlayStation controller, so if you have a game dependent on these things, bear in mind it may be trickier to play with this controller. Games that depend on the touchpads will be using the sticks instead. The mini wired gamepad costs $30 and will be available to purchase later this year. In-game releases this week, Opus Magnum came to Steam. Developed by Zachtronics, the studio behind Shenzhen.io and Infinifactory, Opus Magnum is currently in early access and centers on alchemy, specifically on building machines that combine elements for alchemical formulas. While one of their earlier games, Space Chem, was a puzzler involving actual chemistry, Opus Magnum is about the fictional science of making gold from lead. Thus far, player response has been incredibly positive. I'd love to give this game a shot, but to look at any one of Zachtronics' games makes me feel as though I need adult supervision. I'm a grown man. I'm pretty sure their games have sharp edges that will hurt me. That said, if you're up to the challenge of solving puzzles by thinking like an engineer, you owe it to yourself to check out Opus Magnum. It's currently available on Mac, Windows, and Linux. The game Halo Recruit was released this week, and it's really lame. Extra lame. Super lame. Seriously, it's not really a game, it's just a 5-minute tech demo for Microsoft mixed reality headsets, in which you're firing at a screen inside virtual reality. That's right, folks. You're not really moving around inside a virtual world, you're looking at a screen in a virtual world. This thing's so boring that we don't even have a trailer. Just screenshots. Nothing to see here, folks. A Morticians Tale came to Steam and itch this week, and sadly, it seems to be a bit of a disappointment. The game's premise is that you play as a mortician at a funeral home, and you're learning your way around directing funerals. It's a narrative-driven game in which you prepare bodies for cremation or burial. You attend funerals and hear about the deceased. It's a really interesting concept for a video game, but the players seem to be frustrated by the fact that it only lasts 40 minutes and doesn't really get to explore its themes in depth. For a game that's supposed to be about helping people to deal with grief, it doesn't really set aside a whole lot of time for the subject. The few reviews from some of the bigger press are largely positive, praising the game's death-positive philosophy and what seems to be its central thematic conflict, that the deaf industry is first and foremost an industry that doesn't necessarily care about people as a whole. However, the player response has largely been negative. According to Steam user Aquatic Justice, who claims to work at a funeral home, the game does far too much hand-holding and doesn't allow the player to do much at all. No taking the hearse to pick up bodies, or really guiding families through the arrangement process. A pity, really. Personally, I was looking forward to this game because I love the concept of a video game that's about helping people to deal with loss, and about seeing the underside of an industry that you don't tend to think of often, but now I think I'm just gonna have to put this one on the back burner. A Morticians Tale is available on Mac and Windows. Brawlhalla left early access on Steam this week, and if you're a fan of Smash Bros., you owe it to yourself to check this game out. Brawlhalla is a free-to-play multiplayer platformer in which your goal is to knock your opponents off the platform. It's pretty straightforward, and it's free to play, with a regular rotation of characters. If you'd like permanent access to a character, you can either purchase one through in-game currency that you earn by playing, or by purchasing them outright. It's a pretty fair business model. I've played my fair share of Brawlhalla. I tend to favor playing as Queen Nai, and I have to say that I really dig the game. It has support for up to 4 players, either online, locally, or mixed, so if you have a friend over, you can either fight against one another, or team up and take on players online. It's not at all a technically demanding game, though I do recommend that you have a couple controllers lying around, as while it is playable on keyboard, it's a bit more of a challenge there. Brawlhalla is available on Mac, Windows, and PlayStation 4. A more unusual game to be released this week is Megaton Rainfall. Now, Megaton Rainfall is a VR game in which you're playing as a superhero zipping around a city fighting alien spaceships. You're incredibly powerful, but you have to be careful with your powers not to cause a lot of damage as you're trying to save lives. You are invulnerable, but the people on the ground are not. You're scored based on how little damage is done to the cities being besieged by these interstellar threats, potentially yourself included. Thus far, critical response to the game has been very positive. Apparently, the gameplay is quite fun, and the premise works quite well. Games about invulnerable superheroes in the past seem to have struggled with putting enough tension on rescuing people. These games are, after all, power fantasies. While it may be fun to fly around and flex your imaginary muscles, tossing UFOs into one another, a lot of the tension that's necessary to keep these sorts of games engaging just isn't there. In the Batman Arkham series of games, which is massively successful, Batman at the end of the day is just a normal dude who's a ninja with a lot of money. He can be hurt. Superman, on the other hand, cannot. Normal people, however, can. Now, this is a game that is playable on your PlayStation 4 without the VR headset. I've been hearing that while it is fun on the PSVR, the PSVR doesn't feel strictly necessary to be experienced. In fact, it still works fine on a normal screen. Megaton Rainfall is set to be released on Steam at a later date. In crowdfunding news this week, the game Lonely Mountains Downhill hit Kickstarter, and visually, it's pretty stunning. I'm not generally into sports games, but I'm already sold on the beautiful, low-poly art. I'll let the game's developers explain it from here.
Hi, and welcome to our Kickstarter campaign. I'm Daniel.
And I'm Jan, and together we are working on Lonely Mountains Downhill. Lonely Mountains is a game about you, your bike, and the mountain ahead.
We wanted to create a different kind of sports game. A game which is not about winning tournaments, but simply about the joy of riding a bike. The game will take you all over the world to the most beautiful places where you need to find your way down the mountain.
We started the development 2 years ago, and we spent a lot of time working on the core gameplay until we felt that the controls of the bike and the movement is really right.
To make sure we're not the only ones who think that, we had already tested the game with hundreds of players at different events. The feedback was so great that it finally encouraged us to make this Kickstarter campaign.
We are now ready for the actual production of the game and to create the actual game content. If you like what you saw in the video, we hope you join us on our ride and help us spread the word.
If you have any questions, please let us know in the comments or join our Discord server.
All the best from Berlin.
And happy riding.
Another game that caught my eye on Kickstarter this week is Fell Seal Arbiters Mark, which is a tactical RPG along the lines of Final Fantasy Tactics. Now, this is a game set in a fantasy world ruled by immortal rulers, the legislative branch of government, and it tells the tale of the Arbiters, who in this world seem to be both the judicial and executive branches to the Immortal Council. You play as Kairi, an Arbiter captain who uncovers spreading corruption that threatens the peace and order of the world. It's up to her to root it out. Now, the game's story sounds pretty neat to me personally, and its pixel art is really gorgeous. The game's aesthetic seems rather unique. Then too is the music, composed by Jan Morgenstern. The 3 tracks available right now are honestly fantastic. I haven't yet tried the game, but if you'd like to give it a shot, there's a demo available to download via the game's Kickstarter page. Fell Seal Arbiters Mark is set to be released in 2018 for Windows, Mac, Linux, and Xbox One, with tentative plans to release the game on the PS4. The Switch is currently being considered. Personally, I think the game would do well on the Nintendo Switch. Tactical RPGs, think Fire Emblem, do tend to do quite well on handheld consoles. If you ever wished that Splatoon were a 2D platformer with a lot of wall jumping, you may want to check out Splasher. Now, this game was released earlier in the year for PC, Xbox One, and PS4, where it received pretty positive reviews. The premise was pretty simple. Get through a factory full of hazards as quickly as you can, all while splashing different colors of paint all over your environment. Now, each color has a different attribute. Maybe you'll bounce off the walls, maybe you'll stick to them. You have to get creative in order to make good time. Splasher is set to come to the Nintendo Switch on October 26. Check it out if you're looking for something new. A video game set during the 20-year Numancian War has been unveiled. Historical turn-based strategy game Numancia is coming to the PS4, Xbox One, and PC on October 25th. Now, in case you hadn't heard of the Numancian War, it took place from 153 to 133 BC. At the end of this conflict, Rome had wound up expanding its territory into the Iberian Peninsula. This territory is today Spain and Portugal. Now, personally, I find myself drawn to a game set during a period of history that tends to get overlooked in the world of gaming. You may want to check out Numancia once reviews go live. Finally, we leave you with a trailer for MMO Duel Universe. It's rather pretty. This game was one of the most well crowdfunded on Kickstarter ever. It's in alpha right now, and it seems as though it'll fulfill the multiplayer promise of No Man's Sky. It's very ambitious. That's it for this week's game news. For all the greatest game news, interviews, and more, be sure to follow at OneWillBeCool on Twitter and Instagram. Follow me at Jordan_Cameron for my own views. Oh, you're still here. Well, here's a very brief trailer for Vanner Saga 3 that was released this week. Enjoy.
We travel now through darkness, through danger and despair, so that others may live. But at what cost?